In geopolitics, some of the world's most important battles never involve armies. No missiles, no invasions, no declarations of war. Instead, they revolve around something far less dramatic: ports. Because in the 21st century, controlling trade can be just as important as controlling territory. And few projects illustrate that reality better than a stretch of coastline on the shores of the Indian Ocean, a place that, at one point, was expected to become one of the largest ports on the African continent. A place where China's ambitions, Africa's economic future, and the changing geography of global trade unexpectedly converged. Bagamoyo. For years, it was promoted as a transformational project. Then it stalled. Many assumed it was finished. But today, Bagamoyo is back at the center of one of the most important geopolitical questions facing East Africa. Why was China willing to invest billions of dollars into a port that did not yet exist? And what did Beijing see that everyone else was missing? The answer begins with a simple reality. Geography never retires. Governments change, policies change, leaders come and go, but geography remains. And geography has always favored East Africa. Every year, enormous volumes of global commerce move across the Indian Ocean: manufactured goods from Asia, energy supplies from the Middle East, raw materials from Africa, consumer products destined for markets across the world. Together, these flows form one of the most important commercial systems on Earth. Any country positioned along these routes possesses strategic significance. Tanzania is one of those countries. Its coastline faces directly into the Indian Ocean. Its ports connect maritime trade with the interior of Africa. And behind that coastline lies access to markets extending far beyond Tanzania itself. Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Eastern Congo, millions of consumers, growing economies, expanding demand. For decades, the strategic value of this geography remained underutilized. Then China arrived with a different vision. By the early 2010s, Beijing was pursuing one of the most ambitious infrastructure strategies in modern history. Roads, railways, industrial parks, energy facilities, ports. Across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and beyond, Chinese companies were helping construct the physical infrastructure of globalization. To some observers, this appeared to be purely economic, but infrastructure creates more than economic returns. It creates influence. A railway shapes trade patterns, a power plant shapes industrial development, and a port shapes the direction of entire economies. China understood something that many countries were only beginning to recognize. The future global economy would not be defined solely by who produced goods. It would also be defined by who connected markets. That is where Bagamoyo entered the picture. The vision was extraordinary: a massive deepwater port, industrial zones, logistics hubs, manufacturing facilities, transportation links, a commercial ecosystem designed to operate on a continental scale. The projected investment figures attracted global attention. Billions of dollars, long-term expansion plans, ambitions to handle shipping volumes capable of competing with major regional ports. If successful, Bagamoyo would not simply be another African port. It would become a strategic gateway connecting East Africa to global supply chains, and by extension, connecting China to the economic future of one of the world's fastest-growing regions. The project appeared perfectly aligned with Beijing's broader vision of connectivity. But that alignment would eventually create its own challenges. Because major infrastructure projects are never just engineering projects, they are political projects. Questions began emerging. Who would control the port? Who would assume the risks? How much influence should foreign investors possess? Could national interests remain protected? As negotiations became more complex, public debates intensified. Supporters argued that the project could transform Tanzania's economy, while critics feared excessive dependence on external actors. The conversation gradually shifted. Bagamoyo was no longer simply a development initiative. It had become a national sovereignty issue. And when infrastructure becomes political, uncertainty follows. Then came the slowdown. Negotiations stalled, momentum faded, timelines slipped. The future of the project became increasingly unclear. Across international media, Bagamoyo was often portrayed as another example of a grand vision colliding with political reality. For many observers, the story appeared finished. Yet beneath the headlines, something important remained unchanged. the strategic logic that created the project in the first place. The geography had not changed. The shipping routes had not moved. East Africa's economic growth had not stopped. And China's interest in global connectivity had not disappeared. This is where the story becomes larger than Bagamoyo, because the port reveals a fundamental shift occurring across the global economy. The competition between major powers is increasingly taking place through infrastructure ports, railways, industrial corridors, energy networks, data cables, logistics systems. These assets determine how trade moves, and trade determines where wealth accumulates. For centuries, maritime power was measured by fleets. Today, it is increasingly measured by access. Access to ports, access to markets, access to supply chains. The countries and companies that shape these networks acquire influence long before military power enters the equation. China recognized this reality earlier than many of its competitors, and Bagamoyo became one expression of that broader strategy. Yet Beijing's interest in East Africa is not solely about commerce. The region sits at the intersection of several strategic corridors: the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Suez Route, and the maritime pathways connecting Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. These routes support enormous portions of global trade. Any disruption affects economies far beyond the region itself. As East Africa grows economically, its importance within these networks is increasing. The ports that serve this growth will matter. The infrastructure that supports these ports will matter. And the external actors that help shape this infrastructure will matter. Which explains why projects like Bagamoyo continue attracting attention despite years of uncertainty. Today, the project has re-emerged. The original vision has evolved. New stakeholders have entered the conversation, and economic conditions have changed. But the strategic question remains remarkably similar. Can Bagamoyo become the maritime gateway its architects envisioned? And if it does, who stands to benefit most? Tanzania, international investors, regional economies, or China itself? The answer may shape trade patterns across East Africa for decades. Because Bagamoyo was never simply about building a port. The cranes are not the story. The shipping containers are not the story. Even the billions of dollars are not the story. The real story is influence, the ability to shape economic geography, the ability to connect markets, the ability to position oneself at the center of future trade flows. That is what made Bagamoyo important. That is what continues to make it important. And that is why a quiet stretch of Tanzanian coastline remains one of the most fascinating geopolitical projects in Africa. Not because of what it is today, but because of what it could become: a gateway, a hub, a strategic crossroads, and perhaps one of the clearest examples of how infrastructure has become one of the defining instruments of power in the 21st century. In the modern geopolitical contest, influence is no longer built only with armies. Sometimes it is built with ports,